Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 22nd of November 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, is Mike Robinson. I'll just say that the wind has finally appeared here in Plymouth, and all those glorious autumn leaves are disappearing very quickly, which is a pity.
It is. Now, we're going to start off with a subject we haven't covered too much on the programme, and that is Palestine. And we'll start off with this case, which is Ashraf Abu Rama. He was arrested on the 27th of October this year. He was eventually appeared in court after his court case was held back several times. That resulted in being held with no charge up until the 21st of this month. And he's just been sentenced yesterday or the day before to 3 months in prison. He has to pay 5,000 shekels for supposedly throwing stones. So we're going to talk to a guest. So I'm delighted to welcome onto the programme Robert Inlakesh. Welcome to the programme, Robert. Robert is a journalist, political analyst, human rights activist. He specialises in geopolitical scene in the Middle East, particularly in Palestine. He's a regular writer for Al Masdar News. Welcome to the programme, Robert.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you are currently in Canada. You've been in Palestine for the last 3 months or so, just recently back in Canada. Before we start with Ashraf, just give us some thoughts on the general situation in Palestine at the moment.
At the moment in the West Bank, there is an ongoing ethnic cleansing campaign throughout the West Bank, but primarily in an area called the Jordan Valley. That's where it's most rampant, but they're constantly expanding settlements on Palestinian land and taking away Palestinian land and bulldozing Palestinian structure. And it's really not a very good situation for the people living there. They endure constant harassment by the Israelis. No matter where you go in the West Bank, and depending where you are in the West Bank, the occupation and the harassment manifests itself in different forms. So it's a very dire situation at the moment, unfortunately, for the Palestinian people, and has been for the past 70 years, unfortunately.
Robert, you've been there, and you're reporting on, well, you're telling us now what you've seen, what you've experienced. How many other journalists do you think are on location and reporting honestly and accurately about what's really happening in Palestine?
There's a number of journalists there, but I never met anybody from the West Bank from either the BBC or CNN or Fox or anything like this. Organizations like this seem to be incapable, despite their vast number of resources, to be able to go to the West Bank and put a camera on just the most basics of the occupation. From my experience, is what I've seen.
Okay, well, let's get back to Ashraf Abu Rama then. Can you give us a little bit more background to this? He's obviously in prison at the moment. He's he's convicted, you're saying here, of throwing stones. But we've picked on this one case. He's clearly not a unique case at all.
Definitely not a unique case. This is something that they always hold against Palestinian people. It's pretty much the general charge. If they haven't got anything to actually charge you with, then it's throwing stones, because they know they can get a definite sentence from this. And Israeli courts are like kangaroo courts. There's a B'Tselem statistic put out, I believe, in the year 2015, which basically said that the conviction rate in Israeli military courts of Palestinians is something like 99.74%, so almost 100%. And I believe that statistic still holds true or very close to the number.
And he was given an Israeli lawyer, is that correct?
Yes, he was given an Israeli lawyer, but his wife, who hasn't been able to make contact with him except in the courtroom itself, and I believe himself as well, weren't able to contact that lawyer only on the day of the court case. So they weren't able to have any other contact with her, this Israeli lawyer. So they really didn't know what was going on. They were left out of the picture really until the court date.
And so, I mean, what do Palestinian people see in the future? Because if this type of thing is going on, are they angered by this? Does this cause people to come out onto the streets? How do they see their future, and how are they going to play this game as we move forward?
Well, speaking for Bil'in, which is one village, I mean, Palestine in general, there's millions of people, so to try and speak for the general population is very difficult. But Bil'in in general, which is the village that Ashraf is from, I stayed there for the majority of my stay in Palestine. And they have taken to the street. They have a weekly Friday demonstration, which has grown in numbers now because of the arrest of Ashraf. So they are demonstrating in a peaceful manner at the wall. They have a very famous demonstration in Bil'in, in which they demonstrate in very creative ways most of the time as well. So yes, they've started building up their protest because of this, and they were punished because of building up their protest. This Sunday, the village itself was raided by over 150 troops, policemen, and the Shabak, which is the Israeli intelligence. They came in over 20 military jeeps, and they came in trucks as well. And they came and detained 2, let them go, and then arrested 2 more. So they arrested Abdullah Abu Rahma, and they also arrested a 16-year-old. His name's Ahmed Abu Rahma, both the cousins of Ashraf. And then they were threatening many people in the village. I mean, with 150 troops, clearly when they were there at 1 o'clock in the morning until 4 o'clock in the morning, they were there to harass people, and they came prepared looking like they were for a war. So it's a very... the situation there is never certain, and anything could happen. People could be killed at any second, and it's very, very difficult for the Palestinians to cope with this.
And there was some question about the behavior of the Israelis when they arrested Ahmed. The Israelis said they would trade him under certain circumstances. What was that all about?
So they arrested him, they took him away, and his brother went to ask for reasons as to why they took him, because they didn't know. Basically, the Israeli police came through the wall, and they were IDing everybody on spot. Ashraf was with a number of friends and 2 international activists. It was on the day of a demonstration, but much later after the demonstration. And he didn't have his ID on him, so they just arrested him on the spot. And there's a live video of the arrest. It was just pretty much they heard his name and they decided on the spot to arrest him. So his brother asked the Israelis as to why they arrested him, and they said, "Look, if you trade us the children who 2 of the children who are cutting the fence, going at night and cutting the fence and messing with the wall, at the illegal wall which cuts into Palestinian land, then we will give you Ashraf." So they basically, this was in private, not recorded, but they basically wanted to bargain for children.
Okay. What can you say about that? Now, look, the final question then on this, what can people do in the UK or anywhere else? What can people do to offer support? Have you any thoughts on that?
At the moment, for this case, it's spreading awareness for Ashraf and others. And also, we are going to put up a fundraiser to be able to raise the 5,000 shekels so that his wife can pay the fees, because she just doesn't have the money.
Just to interject there, if that fine isn't paid, does he stay in prison?
Yes.
Even
Yes,
past the 3-month term?
Yes, there's
Right.
also been probation for 5 years. So if he engages in any political activity, including the weekly demonstrations, then he can be put in prison for a further 1.5 years.
Okay.
Robert, if I may,
Sorry.
just a final additional question. How do the Palestinians see the Israeli response? We know, we can see by going online that many people in Israel don't agree with the policies that their own government is carrying out. Is the fact that there is some discord, many people would say an increasing discord inside Israel as against the Israeli government policies, is that known to the Palestinians? Do they see that Israel is not simply one united nation?
The Palestinians know because there are Israelis that come and participate in the peaceful demonstrations, but unfortunately, the mass sort of demonstrations against the Israeli government aren't always identifying with the Palestinian population. It's a very right-wing society. So some of these protests against the government are because of the treatment of Palestinians, and there's many groups that are actively speaking out against the occupation in general. But the Israeli population in general has absolutely no problem, according to polls. And from my experience speaking to a lot of Israelis, does not want to end the occupation. But the Palestinians very much praise any Israeli that identifies with helping them achieve their human rights.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for that. Now, I just wanted to bring this one in to end on Palestine. This was just pushed out by France 24 before we came on air. It's saying that the Palestinians, the Palestinian Authority, have frozen all meetings with the United States after the United States decided to close the Palestinians' representative office in Washington. And the statement they made was, what's the use of holding any meetings with them? When they close our office, our meetings begin from our office and the arrangements are there. In practice, by closing the office, they're freezing all meetings and we're making that official. So that's an interesting development. And I wondered whether you've any thoughts on it, whether this is the influence of Mr. Kushner and the connections between the United States administration and Benjamin Netanyahu, or whether perhaps there might be a certain amount of typical Trump activity here, doing something which is perhaps a little bit outrageous in order to stir the pot up a little bit. I know I'm kind of dropping this on you because you maybe haven't seen this story, it being the first thing in the morning for you there.
Well, I saw the fact that they threatened the Palestinian Authority if they didn't want to deliver something to basically say that they were going to make a greater effort to engage in peace talks with the Israelis. And I saw something about Mahmoud Abbas freezing contact with the United States just before I went to sleep. I think basically it could have been a Kushner influence. Of course, it's very hard to tell, and it's just speculative at the moment. Jared Kushner is himself invested in Israeli settlements in the West Bank, which are illegal against international law. And I think it's just a capitulation to Israel's wills, namely because of the Israeli lobby. That's what I'd say. In particular, pinning it just solely on Donald Trump, perhaps. It may have been a move, but to stir the pot, I mean, what are the Palestinians going to achieve out of peace talks that they haven't already been, they wouldn't achieve anyway?
Yeah.
They've got, unless the Israelis are willing to give up significant amounts of lands and take the settlers out of the West Bank and drop the siege on Gaza, I don't think that there's much that can be achieved. I mean, it's an ongoing colonization of Palestinian land. They're not at all capitulating to international law. So, I mean, I just see this as shunning the Palestinians and trying to force them to make more concessions. That's really what I see it as personally. But at the moment, as to where this came from precisely, it's speculative, of course, but we just have to wait and see.
Okay, Robert, thank you very much for joining us. Robert Inlakesh. Hopefully we'll speak to you again in the not too distant future. Thank you. Okay, we shall move on then. After the Afghan opium report came out earlier in the week, well, it seems that the American administration has decided to do something about the amount of opium that's coming out of Afghanistan, and they've decided to drop bombs in Afghanistan. They're not dropping them on the opium crops themselves. They're dropping them on the manufacturing plants that are converting that into heroin. And so B-52s, F-22s, along with Afghan A-29s, took out 10 opium refining facilities. And this is called Operation Jagged Knife, and it's happening in northern Helmand province. Now, Helmand province produces, as we mentioned the other day, about 70% of Afghanistan's opium, and that is about 80 to 90% of the world opium production. Helmand, of course, is the province of Afghanistan that Britain was responsible for during the occupation there. And officially, this year's opium production, as we mentioned a day or two ago, is breaking all records. It's expected to weigh in at 9,000 tons. And of course, before the US invasion of Afghanistan, the largest recorded amount there was 4,500 tons. So we've doubled the production in Afghanistan since the 2001 invasion. Now, between 1996 and 2000, the Taliban controlled areas were producing opium and they were exporting that. But in 2000, the Taliban leader, Mullah Omar, decided that opium was against Islam and he banned its cultivation. We can see that clearly on the graph there. However, after the invasion of Afghanistan, the Taliban, they're the main drivers of opium production at the moment because that's what's funding their insurgency, the insurgency which we created effectively. If we look at how this is affecting people, where are the drugs going is the question once they leave Afghanistan. We look at the United States. Many mainstream media reports on the fact that drug deaths in the United States are rising faster than ever. In fact, opiate-related drugs is now a bigger killer in the United States than guns, than road accidents. Outside of health issues, it is the major killer in the country. And this doesn't just apply to the United States. It also applies in the United Kingdom as well. 330,445 people, according to this year's drug use statistics, on opiates of some type, mainly heroin. Heroin is the main cause of death, of drug overdose death in this country. 2,655 deaths. That's, what have we got? 1,500 deaths a year on our roads, Brian. 2,655 deaths due to heroin overdose. And yet, heroin overdose really doesn't seem to get too much media coverage. Road accidents, road deaths, this gets regular mainstream coverage. But what I found was particularly fascinating was this, because we have the United Kingdom with the largest drug-induced mortality rates in Europe. That compares with most other Western European countries significantly less. 87% of the deaths as a result of drug overdose are as a result of opiates. And so this is a problem that we have created through our activity in Helmand province, encouraging the poppy growers to produce, encouraging the production of opiates, and yet we can't provide opiates for the National Health Service, and so we have to encourage British farmers to grow poppies. And I'm just going to put this one back on screen because it's really important. This is the US Representative John P. Walters saying that Britain opened the door to narco traffickers in Afghanistan, and now it's impossible to tell the difference between the traffickers and the insurgents. This is a key point. It is British policy. But Britain and the United States are the main recipients of what's produced in Afghanistan, and it's our people which are being who are being damaged and killed by these drugs.
Yeah, as a result of it. And when we had the bulk of the troops on the ground in Afghanistan, as far as we were informed, they were not allowed to touch those poppy fields. So you now use, I think the F-22 Raptor costs about $340 million US per aircraft. You're using that very, very expensive asset to drop bombs. Which of course is public money which could be spent on dealing with the drug problem across the board.
That's absolutely right.
Well, the US military may be able to drop bombs in Afghanistan using the F-22 Raptor, but problems across the Pacific Fleet continue. 4 warships over recent months have had major collisions and groundings. Some of the US Navy reports are blaming this on insufficient training with such basic things as steering the ships, Mike. They had trouble with steering consoles. We've now got, unfortunately, an air crash here with the Grumman C2. These are the aircraft that supply carriers if they're within range. This one taking 11 passengers out to the aircraft carrier. It's ditched. I think 11 people have been saved, but they're still looking for another 3. But a lot of people are starting to say, what is going on with the American Pacific Fleet, and why is it that the US military is having such problems? Well, Brexit. Are people starting to wake up? This was sent to us in the last couple of days. Get Britain Out is now starting to talk about defence. Post-Brexit, Britain should steer clear of EU defence programmes post-Brexit. It added the potential creation of an EU army was undoubtedly a contentious issue in the run-up to the EU referendum in June last year. Leave campaigners pointed to the dangers of integrating Britain's armed forces into an EU military force. It goes on to say it's clear a vote to leave was a vote against UK participating in defence programmes controlled by Brussels. However, recent documents suggest an EU army is indeed on the cards. And while Britain has declined to be a full participant, we may end up being closely affiliated with it if clear assurances are not given to the country. They're finally beginning to wake up, Mike, but the language is still not strong enough because we're very there. This one amused me. Nigel Farage apparently woken up. Nigel Farage argues that the Brexit betrayal has begun. This is the Brexit betrayal that we pointed out the moment Brexit was announced. But Nigel Farage finally recognising that the nation is being betrayed under the lie of Brexit.
Well, sticking with Brexit, we got this report from Mike Sivier's Vox Political blog. Brace yourselves, Parliament is getting ready to ditch all your EU-maintained human rights. He says, first, the Tory government lays out a plan to strip the citizens of the UK of a vital part of their nation's infrastructure. In this case, it is EU-supported human rights laws. Then members of the opposition and Tory backbenchers combined to threaten rebellion against the proposed legislation, claiming the change is unacceptable. So the Tory government offers to work with the rebels and see how the change can be smoothed over. In this case, it would involve exploring how human rights could be kept. In response, the rebels withdraw their amendment and the government gets its way. The work to see how the change can be ameliorated never happens. Tories, he says, have been salivating at the prospect of ending your human rights for years. They're planning to replace the Human Rights Act with a Bill of Rights that would have meant you could not do anything you didn't want. Think about that, he says, until Brexit came along. They're going to let this go. The best way to see how EU human rights laws can be kept after Brexit is to transfer EU human rights laws to the UK in the EU withdrawal bill. If that doesn't happen, then you better get used to the fact that after March 29th, 2019, if Brexit happens, you will have no rights. Brexiteers, is that really what you wanted? And I have to say, Brian, this really strikes to the heart of the whole human rights discussion that I've been trying to encourage people to have for quite some time now. I do not understand why British people have forgotten 1,500 years of history. I do not understand why people have forgotten that the rights of British people are unalienable. They're based on the notion that our rights cannot be removed. And this is the problem with human rights. If you start with the premise that you have no rights, and this is the European model, a blank piece of paper, and you start writing down what rights people have, then of course they can be taken away. If your constitution is based on the idea that your rights are unalienable, then they can't be removed. And I do not understand why people, including many, many campaigners, go running off to Europe to uphold their rights when they have rights which are based on British law and British constitutional law. and they should be really demanding those rather than this European model.
Mike was saying some people have forgotten about it. We've got the issue that, of course, many young people are not taught about it. This is not being discussed in schools. Matters of the Constitution and our history around the Constitution simply wiped off the education syllabus. So many people not talk about it. And then, of course, we have our press and media, particularly the BBC, who simply stamp out any notion that this country has a constitution. And we're led to believe, particularly by the BBC, that the only way to go is via these human rights. But I'm going to follow that segment up with this story, which was sent through to us. We're going back to February of this year. This is one of the most incredible stories I think I've ever come across, and I'm sure that our viewers and listeners are going to pick up the significance of this very quickly. So the article was picked up in Community Care, which is talking mainly about public sector and social work matters, and this is the article itself. 3 social workers who were named by a judge in an exceptional case which involved one of them lying on oath have been cleared of wrongdoing by the Health and Care Professions Council. The social workers from Hampshire Council, Sarah Walker-Smart, Kim Good and Lisa Humphreys, were named by Judge Mark Horton in November 2015 after he found children had been illegally taken into care and a family's human rights had been breached. He also found social workers had altered the report of another social worker to make it more negative and knowingly withheld evidence from the court. So this was all statement by the judge about the actions of these particular social workers. But then we have this amazing situation. In a statement to Community Care, the Director of Children's Services from Hampshire, Steve Crocker, said that HCPC had vindicated the council's decision to back the social workers by exonerating them.
Sorry, I'm confused here, Brian. These people committed a criminal act by lying in court. Is that what's happened here?
Yes.
But the council has taken it upon itself to exonerate them.
That is correct.
And so it's all fine now.
It's fine as far as these people are concerned. It's not fine as far as the UK column's concerned. Let's follow the story through. Here's Mr. Crocker, Steve Crocker. This is what he had to say. The judge agreed our application for care orders. It was a very complex case, as evidenced in the findings involving some very serious neglect to vulnerable children. The outcome of the court case at that time was consistent with the local authorities' application to the court to safeguard very vulnerable children who were at risk of suffering significant harm as a result of neglect. We'll just get this next bit in as well. He said, we're vindicated in this view by the Health and Care Professional Council's findings in exonerating these social workers. The reason for publishing or not publishing their decision is a matter for HCPC. We have no further comment to make. So that's all pretty interesting. And therefore, whilst there was some criticism by the judge determining the care orders, there was no logic in appealing the outcome of the case, which was made in the best interest of the children. Representations were made through other routes, but we will not comment on those further. So a judge picks up these social workers. He singles them out in a court case. That is then described as sort of comment by the judge, and it's overturned by Hampshire County Council with the help of this professional standards body. It's quite interesting, isn't it? So if we have a look at this in a little bit of the UK column network form, wiring diagram form, as I often call it, we remind ourselves the social workers were judged in court to have lied on oath, knowingly withheld evidence, altered reports to make them more negative, and the judge deemed on top of that that the children were illegally taken into care and the family's human rights breached. But the court order went through. This is the point the Hampshire County Council are making. It went through. But this organisation, HCPC, was brought in, and it says we can confirm we may We were made aware of the court's comments and we investigated the concerns raised through our fitness to practice process. Our legislation requires that the earlier stages of this process are dealt with as private matters. Therefore, we cannot make public the detail of the information we received. However, we followed our usual approach and reviewed all the information obtained, including legal advice, to assess whether the concerns met our standards of acceptance. The concerns did not meet them, which meant we did not proceed to the next stage of the process.
Wow.
Wow, thank you. And we'll carry on because somebody complained, and it then that complaint was taken to the Professional Standards Authority. And the Professional Standards Authority responsible for HCPC said this: I should let you know that the authority has no powers to intervene in decisions made by the HCPC at its investigation stages. However, if we have concerns about its approach, we may raise these directly with the HCPC or consider them within our annual performance review. Now, I called both HCPC and the Professional Standards Authority this morning to get comment from them. I haven't had comment back, but we're going to stay on the case because how can we stress what this means? Well, let's bring in this man, John Tradewell, Staffordshire Legal Services. And this is the local authority solicitor who said this in relation to new powers for local authority. The importance of these words is actually much more fundamental. The words themselves speak of a local government with real power and capacity. Quote, a local authority has power to do anything, unquote. And we are now seeing a local authority, which is Hampshire, simply saying, well, we don't care what the judge said in the court. We're going to overturn it and exonerate the people. We're in a lawless state, Mike. Mm-hmm. And let's complete the circle here by bringing on this couple, Paul and Asher. Paul and Asher had their children taken, but it was UK Column that put out the horrific video of their baby being snatched out of mother's arms by social workers. I can still hear the mother's screams while that was happening. And this was all being done under a local authority where the senior legal man said this authority has the power to do anything. So I'm going to say justice in UK, human rights in UK, absolutely none, utter corruption running through the courts and of course the government systems. And I'll bring on this ad to end this part of UK Column News. We have a lady who tomorrow is going to be evicted unless there's sufficient public support in Plymouth, 53 Trelawney Road, Peveril. This lady, Julia, has been a very strong supporter of the UK Column. Incredible case, information brought into court, simply not valid, judgments made, and then the next minute in the lady's favour, and then the next minute the case begins again. And some of this is going back 17 years. It's been reported to the police as a fraudulent case, and there is a crime number, but hey presto, there's going to be another attempt to get the mother out of her house.
Right. European Central Bank. The European Central Bank has published an opinion. This is the opinion of the European Central Bank, and it's regarding its regime for bank bail-ins and what happens to confiscate deposits under 100,000 euros. These are supposed to be covered under the deposit guarantee scheme, but the central bank has decided that while it likes the scheme, it perhaps wants to take people's money anyway. So let's have a look at what they say. They're talking about a pre-resolution moratorium tool, and that they expect these far-reaching powers that they're talking about to be exercised only in extreme circumstances, if at all. So what are they talking about? Well, they're talking about making it, having the power to freeze deposits, only permitting customers to take out a small amount of money on a daily basis, which is purely at the discretion of the banks for daily expenses. And then that would only happen, though, after they have to wait 5 days for any money at all. So that there's a period of waiting, and then they can take out a small amount each day. They go on to say the maximum period for a moratorium should be 5 working days in total, a limitation which is also necessary considering the severe impact of a moratorium on creditors' rights. The ECB cautions that prolonged periods during which depositors have no access to their deposits undermine confidence in the banking system and might ultimately create risks to financial stability. So they say they're only going to do this in the most extreme circumstances, perhaps like what happened in 2007, 2008. But we don't have to worry, Brian, because this just isn't going to happen again.
Well, that's good.
That's good. Yes. So, but in the meantime, I'm just going to say, you know, the situation in the Eurozone hasn't gone away, and Greece continues. We haven't mentioned Greece in a very long time, but they continue to have major instability. This is local authority workers who have decided to go on strike in response to a call from their unions. This is going to be a 24-hour strike. They want more staff recruited to plug gaps because they're basically they've had so many workers made unemployed over the last period that they can't actually do their jobs at the moment. And in the meantime, there's this. And this has been going on for quite some time because properties have been being repossessed, huge quantities of properties repossessed. And it got to the point that the Greek government decided that I'm going to rephrase that. The Greek government is being forced to put these repossessed homes up for electronic auction, right? And who's forcing them? Well, the European Central Bank and the European Union, because they're saying that they won't get their next lot of bailout if they don't actually implement this. As a result, people that have been protesting these repossessions have been, apparently some people have been threatening the notaries. And the notaries have now demanded, well, they were about to go on strike as well. They're demanding protection, and apparently that protection is being given to them. But nonetheless, the Greek situation continues to rumble on. It hasn't been resolved, and in the meantime, the European Central Bank preparing to seize depositors' assets in Europe.
Well, houses being seized in this country, Mike, through corrupt courts, businesses being seized. We are seeing this massive criminal activity just spread out across the European Union. And of course, ultimately, the banks are in control. Just one point there. Interesting that people in Greece are starting to point a finger at the notaries, which is interesting. Somebody's just pointed out in our chat box that reference to the story I've just covered about Hampshire County Council and the judge's decision being overturned effectively by Hampshire County Council itself. The comment was, well, don't forget that the council will have paid for the use of those courts in order to conduct its child protection business, and therefore the judge would actually represent a clerk in the council's court, and therefore ultimately, yes, the council is judge. Now, if many people are having trouble with that, we can say it's been confirmed in Plymouth and in other locations that, of course, where local authorities press for failure to pay council tax, for example, they pay for the very courts they use. So this is not a court system, it's a place of business for transactions of money and children, houses, whatever else they fancy doing. So we'll cover more on that. Interesting though, you've come in on money, Mike. The BBC is also having a look at money, and I'm going to thank the lady who sent us this very much. It's fascinating. It's one of these new look BBC articles on money changing. Everything we know about money is up for grabs. So will we end up smiling? It's all very jovial. The fact people are going to lose businesses and houses when the interest rates go up is all good fun for the BBC. Then we've got the little prompt that we all have to get on board with the AI stuff. Spending and saving is changing like never before. You can buy things just by smiling at a machine. That sounds a really good idea.
Super.
Meanwhile, tech upstairs threatens to topple two giant pillars of finance, the banking system and even cash itself. But could consumers end up paying the price? Where did this come from? Well, it came from this gentleman here, Kevin Peachy from the BBC. He's their intellectual brainpower. But what our viewer picked up was the little logo at the bottom. Let's blow that up, really. BBC The Disruptors.
Oh, the BBC now consider themselves to be the Disruptors.
I was just fascinated by this. So there's the label, The Disruptors. Where do I want to take our audience? I want to take them back to this video clip that was originally from TED Talks. We showed some of it on UK Column because this gentleman, Dominic Campbell, ex-local authority man, Barnet, I believe, in London, had suddenly been retrained to become a government change agent. And in his talk, he said, we need more disruptors. He repeated this phrase over and over again. We need more disruptors to make the changes we need. So what we're looking at here is the use of people to deliberately disrupt organisations in order to drive the change, which is effectively government policy never debated. Brilliant. Well, where's the policy coming from? Some of it is coming through Westminster, even if it's only by the fact that MPs simply don't debate, they just nod and that policy comes through. I'm also going to thank a viewer who sent us this one. It was former Tory MP Rob Wilson being interviewed by BBC's Joe Coburn in Daily Politics. And she said to him with regard to the inappropriate sexual behaviour, what do we call it, wave at the moment, do you think it's a witch hunt? He said, no, I think there are MPs behaving very inappropriately and those individuals need to be held to account, taken to task, and if it means they lose their ministerial job, well, so be it. That was all pretty crunchy.
Yeah, but he's perhaps given a little bit away there, ministerial jobs, so he is talking about people in cabinet.
Oh, absolutely. And it went on for this one. Do you believe, she said, there's a dossier list of names of MPs and ministers who are of concern? And he said yes, and added, can I just say that this is not to do with Conservative Party or Conservative MPs. This is across all political parties and all aspects of industry and business in this country. That's a remarkable knowledge of the breadth and depth of sexual abuse and inappropriate behaviour. But of course, the elephant in the room was this one, no mention of one of his former colleagues, as it were, within the Tory party, Tim Fortescue, saying to the same BBC cameras that MPs were coming to the whips with problems about little boys and they sorted it so they would do as we asked.
Yeah.
That wasn't mentioned at all. So thank you very much for that clip. It's worth going on to the Daily Politics page and having a look at it and hearing what that man said. A whip himself, when he was asked a little more detail, it all got a bit wobbly. Yes, we did have information and I'm sure whips would do the right thing. But of course, Tim Fortescue told us very clearly that whips didn't do the right thing. Well, let's end on the case of Plymouth naval officer Charles Howeson. This is being widely reported now across the mainstream press. We've taken two headlines from our local Plymouth paper, The Herald. Charles Howeson tried to rape me, victim told police. Ex-girlfriend says man's life was ruined by Charles Howeson encounter. What we picked up on here in this pretty grubby story is Daniel Janner QC, because what does he do as the defence barrister? He absolutely attacks the witness. I want to suggest to you, you're lying about what's happening for an easy way of getting, brackets, compensation. And he goes on, you're a career criminal, and from the age of about 17, you were a thoroughly dishonest person. And the complainant replied, I got into trouble with the police a lot. Yes, what happened to me has affected every aspect of my life. Mr. Janner then asked, are you going to make a claim for compensation? No, the complainant said, I have said I do not want to claim compensation. So this is a direct attack on the person character-wise. And yet this is the government that says, well, don't worry, if you come forward saying that you've been abused or making an allegation you've been abused, then the court system is there to see justice is done.
Yeah.
I find this very, very unsettling procedure by Daniel Janner.
So that's Daniel Janner QC.
Yeah. Well, we'll end on that note. And before we let our audience go today, I'm going to say we do still have these excellent UK column pens for sale. £3.50, that includes postage. Remember that the pen is mightier than the sword. So if you're at home, you're wondering, what do we do to stop events unfolding as we're describing? What you need is a UK column pen. And by purchasing that pen, you will help the UK column. So if you haven't got one, perhaps you'd like to put in an order with us, and we'll be delighted to give you this luxurious and very well designed UK column pen, which also includes a feature of a soft point for use on your touch sensitive iPads. There we are. Thanks for joining us today. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.